for joining us. How's your morning?
It's
The
been
morning.
really nice. I've been enjoying my backyard and we've got Martin Wikelski joining us, and it was great to learn about elephants, migrations, and human cooperation together. It's always a good thing to hear and see. And now
Martin,
we've got, yeah.
I wanted to say hi quickly before I duck out and let Wes take over. Last time I saw you, you were in Zambia, millions of bats flying around. It's a little strange to see you in a house yeah.
Yeah, different setting, different environment, but we're still getting the data from the bats, so that's the good thing.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to jump off. It's all yours, Wes.
Great. Well, hey, Martin, good to see you. It's been a little while. Glad to see that you're still getting great data and able to use the Internet of Animals to continue to do your work, which is really exciting. I've got to say, as the director of the Max Planck Institute for Animal Behavior, you are a leader and an expert in all animal movements. So really excited to hear what you've got to say about the Internet of Animals and what are we going to be seeing today? Let's give us a little tease up while you bring up your presentation.
Well, so we look at what the combined knowledge of animals can give us around the planet, and I think that's quite a lot because well, should I start right away? Is that good?
Well, actually, yeah, let's have you jump right in. We're trying to make the most of the time we have with you. I love this picture, and I'm curious to understand the collective knowledge of animals.
Okay, good. Well, so the key is that I think we are in for a new together with animals around the planet, because we don't only have the analog information of what an animal is, but we can live with animals digitally. And it's really the first generation of animals that are what we call born digital. They are just fully capable of communicating with us, and we can listen to them. And this is actually something that has always been done throughout history of humankind. I mean, people were really fond of their animals. They listened to them. The canaries in the coal mine is a classical one. And still today, animals are the best sentinels for many things. And even in the medieval ages, then the catfish in Japan, they were thought about causing earthquakes because they were jumping out of these ponds in city parks before earthquakes, because apparently they had some prior knowledge of what's happening. And now the really good thing is that these days we understand how animals can have this sixth sense, this special sensing of the environment. And it's very simple. We do it every day, all of us. We have our cell phone with us when we drive. If there are too many cell phones on a road, we get the system telling us, oh, there's a jam, there's a traffic jam, and that combined information gives us this emergent new property of the environment. And that's super exciting because that gives us a novel understanding of life, in that case, life on the roads. But if we do it with animals, if we listen to animals, then this gives us a novel understanding of life on the planet. And we think there's a lot that we can learn. So what we need are wearable computers for animals. And then I'll show you a few examples of what we can predict there. And that's weather and zoonotic diseases, ecosystem services, catastrophes, and also we need that for conservation. And this actually all started with National Geo being convinced that we can have wearable computers for animals. This was 20 years ago when they first funded a study looking at tracking of insect migration. At the time, nobody believed this could work, but it actually does work. It works in bees, it works in butterflies. We did that with monarchs. So you can really study monarch migration, individual migration with these tags. We did that first in a greenhouse and then out in Kansas. Really tracking these tiny little guys, and that's something that's really exciting because you can learn, you can understand what they can tell you, and this is the data are massive. So we now have on the order of 2 to 3 billion locations of animals around the world, GPS locations, and if you see how this expands, how the data are increasing every day is massive. And it really is something like a combined knowledge of movement of these animals. So let's go to the sort of this wearable computer thing, what we still need. We think we need a system that communicates with all the animals, and the best is to do that from space, because there are many places in the world where you don't have other communication systems. So we have worked actually for 20 years to develop such a system with an extremely small tag mass, many animals at the same time on a global scale. And if you have a small device on the ground, and it's like an IoT, an Internet of Things device that sends a tiny little bit of data, then you need a large antenna in space. So to get this antenna in space is actually not easy. You have to get into a large rocket. This is with the Russian colleagues in Baikonur. So you put this up, you put the antenna up in your thingy up there, in the end of the rocket, and then this is the huge antenna that's in there, and then you launch it. This is a great moment. I mean, every launch you have to overcome gravity, which is a bitch, and then you have the cosmonauts, in this case 2 Russian cosmonauts, that put the antenna out. This was a 7-hour spacewalk. And that thing is now up in orbit, circling the world about 16 times a day. You see it in front of the shuttle that's coming there. And it's basically a little data vacuum cleaner. So it flies around the world. It's an antenna that downlinks and also uplinks. And that allows you to get these very small pieces of information from around the world. And this is really how it works. It's like an antenna that runs around the globe and sucks up the data, and not just GPS data, location data, but also sensor data from these tags. So these tags are very small. They are mass produced now, solar panel, little electronics, a battery, and these sensing systems in there. And that allows you to understand what the animal is doing, but also what the animal can communicate to us. And that can be done from a tag on a little bird, on a large bird, on a fish when it pops up to the surface, or on a mammal on terrestrial grounds. And the key is now we are close to really having the systems being tested right now. But what can we do? Let's look at weather and climate, which is sort of the simplest thing that an animal can report back to us from anywhere in the globe. Let's go to the Himalayas, places where it's too hard to fly drones because it's too high up. There are no measurement stations, very few on the ground at least. Kingdom of Bhutan, and there, let's look at the vultures, the griffins. And we actually thought, well, you know, they are just running around, flying around in Bhutan, in this little kingdom, but in fact, they go across the entire Southeast Asian continent. And while doing that, they are measuring the winds, the turbulence, the temperature, the humidity, all of that for us and for the climbers and for the people there, to be able to really predict what's happening there. But this is not only possible in the Himalayas, you can do this in the Alps or any kind of mountains with eagles, while at the same time learning about the life histories of these eagles. Or we sent the storks on a voyage to Africa in masses, and while they circle together in these thermals, they tell us about all these parameters as well. We've also done that with geese. We actually calibrated it with geese, because geese can carry a nice little device. It's almost like what you have in an Airbus or a Boeing. You calibrate that against your own measurements in a glider. This is, Micha wrote a nice story about that, because he trained those geese also. And then you can send these geese on a voyage around the planet, and they tell you all of those parameters all around the planet, which is pretty amazing. Now, that's just the simplest of things, but now we also want to know where the diseases hide, and that's an obvious thing nowadays, but it was predicted that these things are coming. So let's take one of them, Ebola. The bats have actually a bad rap for that, but it's not true. They are not transmitting it. They are not they are in contact with the Ebola host, but they're not transmitting it to anybody else. And that's really important, because what we can do is we can use them as our sniffing dogs. We send them around the world, in this case around Africa or Southeast Asia. They are really important in planting trees and in their ecosystem services. There are lots and lots of them, which is really nice. But then you can also say, well, if you track them, if you have these hypothetical tracks here, and now you have one that's the red one that's going in a certain area, say in southeastern Congo or wherever, and if that has antibodies against a certain disease, then we know it must have met the host of that disease somewhere. And it's not that these bats are transmitting that disease, it's just that they have contact with the host, and that's what we want to know. And that's the same thing if you go to Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, camels that go to the Hajj, where do they come from? How do they transport the disease? Those are all questions that we can now address by following these animals and have them monitor their own state and send it back to us. Now, but you can also, in the next step, learn about the ecosystem services from animals and food safety through other animals. And again, a very topical example, desert locusts, now a massive outbreak in Eastern Africa. Again, to be expected, because there have been a lot of crises and little attention to these issues in the last years. Desert locusts still affect 1 in 10 animals every year. But what we can do is, again, to send our European storks in these areas and have them tell us where the desert locusts get off the ground. And that's very powerful. So you can do that. The storks are good in finding these places, much better than any other human or any other observer. And that's something that will help us to understand and predict these kind of catastrophes. Now, other catastrophes that are also very important and probably also predictable through the senses of animals, the sixth sense of animals, like I said in the beginning, the catfish in the ponds in Japan. We tested this in Italy with earthquakes. And since the early days, the Greek philosophers, the medieval philosophers and Aristotle and all of those, there's always a notion that animals can detect this ahead of time. Now, is this really true? We outfitted animals, farm animals, before a massive earthquake with these sensors, acceleration sensors, to tell us what's happening. On the right, you see about 15,000 locations of earthquakes, small to large, from 0.2 magnitude to 6.6 magnitude. Here you see a distribution. The black triangle is a farm. The yellow square is a measurement station that's actually next to it. And you see below in the earth mantle all the earthquakes and their magnitude. So we have a massive time series of earthquakes and a continuous measurement of what these animals tell us. And what we see is that there is a pretty good predictability. So if the animals get some information that there is a major earthquake coming, then apparently, depending on the distance to the future earthquake center, they give us almost like a crazy warning. It's like almost like a stock market crash. The whole farm goes haywire for about 45 minutes to an hour. And if we record that, and we do that now every 3 minutes in real time from these farms, then we can predict that something is coming. And that's exciting, because that means in the future we can almost triangulate with different farms where such a future hypocenter or epicenter of an earthquake could be. Now, this is it's not a production system yet. We still have to do lots and lots of tests, but you can only do them out where these earthquakes happen. You can't simulate an earthquake really for these animals, but it seems that they are actually pretty good in telling us. And that's something we are doing now in the Rim of Fire, different places, different earthquake areas around the world, to see what animals can tell us and how reliable they are. Because there will be false negatives, there may be false positives. So we still have to find out how good animals are in augmenting the information from other systems. But once animals give us all this information, I think it's also really important that we help them to survive better, because they're our sniffing dogs, they're our friends out there, and we need to help them. And this is really important, for example, for orangutans that need to be repatriated in forests that are really being built up again. There are lots of those animals waiting in captivity to be released. We're working on devices that allows for the release of them, because we want to monitor them and help them if they are in trouble. The same is true for lots of animals in Africa, for these lions that are sometimes problem lions, where you have to know where they are going, but also to protect them in the protected areas. And especially also for rhinos. We have a system now with ear tags, solar ear tags, that allows us to monitor these rhinos very well, but also to use other animals like giraffes that are high up, they see everything. If they see a poacher, and if they also interact with the other animals there, with the zebras and the gazelles, we can actually detect a signal that says there's not a lion coming or so, no, but there's a poacher, a person running through this area. The animals give us this information, and they basically, through us, protect the other animals like the rhinos or the elephants. And you can do that also in the big birds in the Amazon, or in Central America, the aras. And the good thing is also that people are super interested in that. So they want to follow their animals, their digital friends out there. The kids can do that. We also have systems like projects like in Yellowstone, where it's about the interactions of ravens and wolves and bears, where people just go out and then report who is out there, who's doing what, and what are the relationships between these animals. So in a way, you are now in a situation with this Internet of Animals to learn about the natural world. You can almost be like Niels Holgersson. You can sort of fly with your animals. You can be out there with these animals, and you can actually literally do that. So museums are building up these capacities now, and also in private. You can then sort of be as if you are the animal in an environment. You could be this crocodile in the Amazon, and really feel as if you are in the environment, looking through the eyes of your favorite animal, trying to understand what's happening. And you can basically do that in almost real time. So we think this has a fantastic future. It's a new togetherness of animals and people, and we can learn from each other, we can protect each other. And we think that this Internet of Animals is sort of the future, the next big generation, the big revolution after the Industrial Revolution. It's more like a natural revolution that brings us together again in a way that I think is urgently needed.
Well, thank you, Martin. It's great to get an update on the Internet of Animals. I know we first worked together when you were trying out those little tags on the monarchs for the Science of Great Migrations. It's amazing to see how, I think in 10 years, because I know you started the project 20 years ago, it has come so far, and really impressive to see how big data is helping us better understand our planet. We've got a couple questions that have come in from viewers. So I'm going to ask their questions, pass them on to you. Some really interesting ones. So how many animals do you need to tag like this, like you've been doing, in order to actually get data that is viable and reliable?
Well, so for an earthquake area, we did it with, say, 20 farm animals.
Oh,
and
wow.
that seemed to just be, at least give a first glimpse. Now, what we're doing right now with the International Biologging Society, which is sort of the conglomerate of all these people that do this kind of research, there are about 7,000 animals tagged that are currently sending data and have, before the Corona crisis, throughout and now sort of towards the end. And we are all joining up to see how has the relationship between animals and humans changed during that time. So probably with like 6 to 10,000 animals, we can already say something on a global scale.
Oh, wow.
But we're always saying, well, 100,000 sentinels around the world would probably be a good number, but you never know. I think we have to see how much we can say, and also which kind of animal can tell us what.
I was about to ask, like in that 6 or 7,000 or ideal 100,000, what's the difference of types of animals, and how does that spread look like, or ideally look like?
I would think probably a whole bunch of species. So, I mean, in MoveBank, we now have about 900 species being tracked, but not at the same time and not continuously. So I would say, if it's the 100 best species that can tell us something, that would be great. And then I think it's also really cool. Usually when we go to places like these farms in Italy, the farmers tell us, oh, yes, so the cows and the dogs, but not every cow. So it's this cow and that dog and this sheep, because they know that they are very different in their personality and they have different sensibilities.
So it must be interesting then. I'm guessing you then go in and do you pick certain cows and dogs based on that recommendation, or do you blanket and get the whole herd to test against the one anecdotal cow?
We've done it so that we followed the advice of the farmers or the local people.
Yeah.
But we also think that it's a collective phenomenon. It's a swarm phenomenon.
Yeah.
So a single individual can't really tell you, but together apparently they are. I mean, it's like an emergent sensing system. You need the interconnectedness of the sensors to really tell you something.
No, that's incredibly fascinating, because just thinking about the large scale of movement and what that tells us. I'm a big data nerd. I love to look at it and can just dig in. So this is fun for me. And I also have a question too from Stephen in England. So with the tags that are on animals and insects, do they just stop working when the animal dies or gets eaten, or do you get any data about these interactions with their environment?
That's actually really exciting, because the tags now can tell us when the animal died. And that's very important. I mean, it also can tell us before if the animal has problems, if it's sick, but then especially also when, where, and why it died. And that's really important, because we want to understand, like, every year there are on the order of 3 billion songbirds dying in their way from north to south and south to north in their migration. And we know a handful of these casualties, of these disappearances, but we really need to understand what's happening there. And I think that's super exciting, that we not only learn about the location, but also the behavior of the animal and the surrounding at the same time.
It's fascinating that something so small now can be so powerful. I mean, I'm saying that as I'm wearing an Apple Watch, which is basically my own tracking system, which I use for that. It's fascinating to think that something that small can give you so much information. And for me, this is amazing, insights into how animals work, the internet of animals. For you, this is every day, but there's got to be things that like stand out that are like super exciting. Like the past year, what has been like the most unexpected or exciting thing that you've been like, wow, okay, that you can share? I understand there's some things you may not be able to.
Sure. But let's see, maybe, I think it probably was the storks really going into Africa, and they're individual storks, I mean, you see them fly across the problem areas in Syria, and then you don't have a connection for, in this case, it was a cell phone tag. You don't have connection for 2 days because in, say, Damascus, they shut down the cell phone system, but then somewhere in the south of Sudan, they are hitting some desert locust swarm. And you see that in their movement pattern, and how they then change their path, go into the deserts and start feeding a lot there. You see that from the behavioral pattern. So that's actually super exciting. If you see, the system that you imagined could work, it really does work on the ground, and it really, these
Yeah.
animals really tell you what's happening out there. So that's super exciting.
So does the tracker store the data like when it's flying over a space where there's no connectivity, and then report new data and download the old data to you as well, or do you just have a gap?
Yes. So in the cell phone systems, it's actually, they can send lots of data. Via satellite, it's very few data. But yes, they store and then send some intelligent summary, and the rest is still on the tag like a black box.
This is so fascinating, Joe. You've come in, we're like talking about the Internet of Animals and how these tiny little things keep information and share it to Martin all over the world. It's so fascinating because I remember working on projects where there were giant collars on animals, and now they're like super tiny and, you know, as efficient as this thing over here that I've got on my wrist. So it was really exciting to talk with you, Martin, and reconnect and learn a little bit about what you've been working on and share it with everyone. And Joe, I know we've got some great people coming up next to kind of keep us learning about different biodiversity research tactics.
That's right. We're going to take a little trip to the Osa Peninsula. We're going to climb high up into the canopy, and we're going to check out the biodiversity they look for up there, and maybe even see them set up some camera traps. So it should be a fun little time. Yeah.
Right. Well, lastly, I want to thank Martin before I dip away myself. Thank you so much for spending time with us this evening for you. Really appreciate it, and can't wait to hear more about your work and what happens next.
Well, thank you guys. It was a pleasure as always.